Hello everyone. Here are some notes. 1. Everything in the story is not true. 2. Listen and let your imagination follow the story. 3. Leave a comment below when the story ends. Thank you. Mona Lisa and the Illuminati, the Hidden Code. Prologue, the Unseen Truth. For centuries, the Mona Lisa has captivated the world with her enigmatic smile and haunting gaze. But what if there was more to her allure than just artistic mastery? What if Leonardo da Vinci had embedded a hidden message, one that could shake the very foundations of history? In the heart of Paris, within the dimly lit halls of the Louvre Museum, an art historian named Dr. Evelyn Carter was about to make a discovery that would change everything. Underneath the timeless paint, hidden beneath layers of varnish and secrecy, lay a map, a meticulously encoded blueprint that only revealed itself under ultraviolet light. Little did she know. Her discovery would set in motion a deadly pursuit. A secret society had been guarding this truth for centuries, waiting for the day when someone would be foolish enough to uncover Leonardo's final secret. Now, they were coming for her. Chapter 1, A Discovery in the Louvre. Dar. Evelyn Carter had always been fascinated by Da Vinci. As a historian specializing in Renaissance art, she had spent years analyzing every brushstroke, every shadow, and every hidden layer beneath his masterpieces. But tonight, inside the Louvre, she would see something no historian had ever seen before. She stood before the Mona Lisa, the masterpiece encased in its bulletproof glass. The museum was nearly empty, with only a few security guards patrolling the halls. In her hands, she held a small UV flashlight, a tool that had recently helped uncover hidden details in ancient manuscripts. What if, just what if Leonardo had left behind something unseen? With trembling hands, she flicked on the light and aimed it at the painting. And then, a faint glow. Her heart pounded as letters and symbols began to emerge on the painting's surface, forming what looked like a detailed map. It stretched across the background, woven into the faint hills and winding rivers behind Mona Lisa's mysterious expression. But this was no ordinary map. It pointed to something buried deep within history. Before she could process what she was seeing, she heard a footstep behind her. She turned sharply. A tall man in a dark suit stood in the shadows. His piercing gaze locked onto her. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice smooth yet commanding. "You shouldn't be here." The air grew thick with tension. She had been seen. Chapter 2, The Chase Begins. Dr. Carter didn't wait to see what the man wanted. Her instincts screamed at her to run. She bolted down the hall, her footsteps echoing through the empty museum. Behind her, the man followed with measured steps, unhurried, as if he knew she had no escape. Her mind raced. Who was he? A security guard? No, his presence felt more deliberate, more menacing. Ducking behind a pillar, she pulled out her phone, snapping a quick photo of the glowing map before the symbols could fade. Then she turned and sprinted toward the emergency exit. An alarm blared. Security guards rushed toward her, their faces confused. But before they could reach her, the man in the suit simply raised his hand. To her horror, the guards stopped mid-stride. Their expressions suddenly blank. Their eyes glazed over, as if their very minds had been wiped clean. She gasped. "What the hell?" The man turned toward her. His gaze filled with unreadable intent. "You've seen too much, Dr. Carter," he murmured. And then, the lights flickered and went out. Chapter 3, A Code from the Past. Evelyn barely escaped the museum that night. Shaken, she retreated to her apartment, locking the doors behind her. With trembling hands, she pulled up the photo she had taken of the hidden symbols. She sent the image to an old friend, James Holloway, a cryptographer with a fascination for secret societies. Within minutes. Her phone buzzed. James, where did you get this? Evelyn, Louvre. It was on the Mona Lisa, under UV light. James, this is impossible. This isn't just a map, Evelyn. It's a blueprint. A cipher. A message meant to be decoded. Evelyn, decoded into what? James, a location. And if I'm right? A pause. Then. James, it leads to something Leonardo wanted hidden forever. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. And then, her window shattered. Chapter 4, The Illuminati's Secret. Evelyn and James were on the run. The cipher had led them to a remote location in Italy, beneath the ancient city of Florence. The streets above bustled with tourists and street vendors, oblivious to the centuries-old secrets buried beneath their feet. But Evelyn and James knew better. Through a hidden entrance behind the ruins of a forgotten chapel, they descended into the underground catacombs, a labyrinth of cold stone tunnels stretching for miles beneath the city. The air was damp, thick with the scent of age-old decay and candle wax. Shadows flickered across the walls as their flashlights carved narrow beams through the suffocating darkness. With every step, the passage narrowed, forcing them to squeeze through archways no wider than their shoulders. The further they went, the more the silence deepened. Interrupted only by the distant drip of water and the occasional scurrying of unseen creatures. Then, Evelyn saw it. At the end of a narrow corridor, carved into the stone wall, was a set of cryptic engravings. Her breath hitched as she recognized the pattern, identical to the hidden symbols within Leonardo da Vinci's works. The intricate spirals and interlocking circles were reminiscent of the enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa. "This is it," she whispered, pressing her fingers against the cold surface. James ran his hands along the carvings, feeling the grooves worn down by time. "There must be a mechanism," he asserted, scanning the wall. Then, almost instinctively, Evelyn pressed her palm against a sun-like sigil at the center of the design. The stone beneath her touch trembled. A soft rumbling echoed through the tunnel. Dust rained from above. With a low, grinding sound, a section of the wall shifts inward, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase that plunges into darkness. The musty air that wafted up from below carried an eerie chill. As if the passage had been sealed for centuries. Exchanging a look, they both knew there was no turning back. James flicked on a secondary flashlight, illuminating the way as they descended. Each step sent dust swirling into the air, forming ghostly shapes that danced in the dim light. The walls were lined with faded frescoes, their colors dulled by time, depicting celestial spheres and mathematical diagrams. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a vast chamber. The air was frigid now, thick with an unspoken presence. It was here, among the tombs of Renaissance nobles, that they saw it, a massive stone door, unlike anything they had encountered before. It was adorned with the same symbols from the Mona Lisa, its surface covered in Latin inscriptions. James runs his fingers over the words, translated aloud. "Within these halls, genius rests. Disturb the slumber, and knowledge becomes a curse." A shiver crawled up Evelyn's spine. With a deep breath, James reached forward and pushed against the door. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the stones shifted, parting just enough for them to slip through. The moment they stepped inside, the air turned glacial. A whispering sound surrounded them, as if the walls themselves were alive, exhaling secrets in hushed tones. Evelyn could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, thick and suffocating. And then, at the center of the chamber, bathed in the dim glow of their flashlights, they saw it. A pedestal, aged stone, and resting atop it, an ancient, leather-bound manuscript. Leonardo da Vinci's final writings. For a brief moment. Neither of them moved, their minds struggled to process the enormity of their discovery. Then, without warning, the chamber door slammed shut behind them. The walls trembled. A deep, echoing voice fills the air. "You shouldn't have come here." Chapter 5, The Forbidden Manuscript. Evelyn and James stood frozen in the cold chamber, their breath forming faint clouds in the dim candlelight. The leather-bound manuscript lay before them. Its surface aged and cracked, yet radiating an eerie aura of importance. The air was thick with the scent of ancient parchment and damp stone. The whispering sounds intensified, seeping from the walls like ghostly murmurs. Shadows danced unnaturally against the flickering candlelight, as if unseen figures lurked just beyond the reach of their vision. James hesitated before reaching for the book, his fingers trembling with anticipation. "Leonardo's final writings," he muttered under his breath. "This could change everything." The moment his fingertips brushed the cover, the entire room responded. The ground beneath them rumbled. Dust and tiny fragments of stone cascaded from the ceiling as the pedestal began to sink, swallowed by a hidden mechanism within the floor. The air grew heavier, as if the chamber itself was resisting their intrusion. "James, move!" Evelyn shouted, yanking him back just as the entire structure groaned, shifting unnaturally. They turned toward the exit, their only hope of escape, only to find it sealed shut. The stone doorway fused as if it had never existed. Panic surged through Evelyn's chest as she banged her fists against the unyielding surface. Then, from the shadows, a voice, smooth yet commanding, echoed through the tomb. "You were never meant to find this." The whispering ceased. From the edges of the chamber, figures emerged, stepping forward from where they had been concealed in the darkness. They moved with an unsettling grace, their forms barely disturbing the silence. Each of them wore a dark hooded cloak, the fabric embroidered with intricate gold filigree resembling the spirals and geometric designs of Da Vinci sketches. Evelyn's breath hitched. These were not just ordinary guardians of a secret, they were the Illuminati. The first figure stepped forward, lowering his hood. He was tall, his silver-streaked hair pulled back tightly, his sharp features carved with the patience of a scholar. His piercing gray eyes reflected the candlelight like polished steel. He bore an aura of quiet authority, his presence alone enough to command silence. "Professor Callisto," James whispered, recognition flashing across his face. Evelyn stiffened. "Callisto." A name whispered in the deepest academic circles, a historian long presumed dead. Some said he had vanished while uncovering secrets too dangerous to be known. And yet, here he stood, very much alive. "I warned you once, Mr. Lancaster," Callisto murmured, his voice low but firm. "But you insisted on chasing ghosts." Beside him, another figure removed her hood, a woman with striking emerald eyes, her features sharp as a blade. Unlike Callisto, there was no trace of patience in her expression, only cold calculation. Her jet-black hair was woven into an elaborate braid, adorned with golden charms that glimmered in the candlelight. "They should not leave this room alive," she said in an Italian accent, her voice like silk wrapped around steel. James swallowed hard. Behind them, more figures lurked, their faces partially obscured, their hands resting on the hilts of ceremonial daggers adorned with alchemical symbols. Some wore masks of Venetian design, grotesque visages of scholars and fools, their hollow eyes betraying nothing. Evelyn instinctively reached for the small knife she kept in her boot. But Callisto simply raised a hand, his fingers forming a precise gesture. The walls shuddered. The symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. James realized, with dawning horror, that they had walked into something far older and more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. This was not just a secret society. This was a trial. And the price of failure, was death. Chapter 6, The Guardians of the Code. A hooded figure emerged from the darkness. His face was concealed beneath an ornate mask, its surface engraved with the same cryptic symbols that had led them here, the very ones hidden within the Mona Lisa's map. The mask's design was intricate, its features elongated in a way that made him appear both human and inhuman. The moment Evelyn locked eyes with him, a shiver ran down her spine. James instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. His breathing was steady, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded, her voice firm despite the cold dread pooling in her gut. "What is this place?" The masked figure stood motionless for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, he stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his presence an unspoken warning. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, yet laced with an unmistakable menace. "This is the resting place of knowledge never meant for mankind," he intoned. "You are trespassers." James clenched his fists. "We came for the truth." The figure tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the response. "Truth," he whispered. "You seek truth, yet you do not comprehend the cost." With a flick of his wrist, the chamber came alive. Torches lining the walls ignited in unison, their flames unnaturally bright, casting an eerie glow over the ancient stone. The sudden light revealed what had been hidden in the darkness, more figures emerging from the shadows, their robes heavy with the embroidered insignia of the Illuminati. They had been waiting. Evelyn's pulse pounded as she counted them, at least a dozen, maybe more. Some stood still, their faces obscured by masks of Venetian design, grotesque visages of scholars and fools, while others gripped weapons concealed beneath their robes. "What is in that book?" she pressed, her voice unwavering despite the mounting fear. The leader stepped forward, his hood barely concealing the sharp angles of his face. His presence was undeniable, regal, commanding, dangerous. When he spoke, the other Illuminati members fell silent. "Leonardo was not just a painter," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "He was an architect of knowledge forbidden to man. And that book," he gestured toward the manuscript, which still rested atop the now partially sunken pedestal. "It is the key to something far greater than you can imagine." James and Evelyn exchanged a glance. They had come too far to turn back. Then, chaos erupted. The Illuminati attacked. One of the masked figures lunged first, drawing a curved dagger that gleamed in the firelight. James barely had time to react, ducking just in time as the blade sliced through the air where his throat had been moments before. Evelyn stumbled back, reaching for her own weapon, a small but deadly knife she had hidden beneath her jacket. Another figure rushed toward her. She dodged, barely managing to evade the glinting steel aimed at her ribs. The chamber rang with the sounds of combat, blades clashing, bodies moving with lethal precision. James fought off one attacker, knocking him into a stone pillar, but another took his place immediately. Evelyn twisted, slashing her knife across the arm of a cloaked figure, drawing a sharp grunt of pain. Blood splattered across the floor. They were outnumbered. Then, an explosion. The back wall shattered, sending dust and debris into the air. The force knocked Evelyn off her feet. Through the haze, she saw figures moving, but these were not Illuminati. A second faction had arrived. A man strode into the chamber, his coat flaring as he moved, a gun in one hand and an ancient scroll clutched in the other. He was older, mid-50s, with graying hair and a presence that commanded instant attention. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Evelyn and James. "Time to go," he said in a crisp British accent. Before they could react, his allies, 3 of them, dressed in black combat gear, opened fire. Not with bullets, but with smoke grenades. The chamber was instantly flooded with thick, blinding fog. "Move," the man barked. James grabbed Evelyn's wrist, pulling her with him as they stumbled through the confusion. The Illuminati figures reeled, their shouts lost in the chaos. Footsteps pounded behind them. The masked leader's voice cut through the fog. "You cannot escape the truth." Then, a passageway opened, one Evelyn hadn't noticed before. The man leading their escape pulled them through. And the moment they were inside, a hidden mechanism sealed the entrance shut behind them. Silence. Evelyn coughed, waving away the smoke as she turned to the man who had just saved them. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. He smirked. "Gabriel Mercer. Historian. Cryptologist. And, unfortunately for you, the only person who can keep you alive." James narrowed his eyes. "Why should we trust you?" Gabriel tossed the ancient scroll onto the ground between them. "Because you're not the only ones after the book. And if we don't move fast, you're both as good as dead." Evelyn looked at James. The Illuminati wasn't their only enemy. And the real danger was just beginning. The Illuminati lunged. James barely dodged the first sweeping strike of a curved dagger, twisting just in time to knock over a burning torch. Flames erupted, licking up the damp stone walls and casting an eerie, golden light over the chamber. For the first time, they saw hidden carvings emerging from the fire's glow, strange symbols, spiraling scripts, and geometric patterns buried within the tomb structure. They had no time to analyze them. James grabbed Evelyn's hand, pulling her into a sprint toward the nearest exit. Their boots pounded against the ancient floor, their breath ragged as the cold air bit at their skin. The Illuminati pursued them with terrifying speed. Their movements were unnatural, too fluid, too precise, like they weren't bound by normal human limitations. Evelyn dared a glance over her shoulder and saw their robes barely stirring, their feet gliding over the floor as if they were moving without friction. "They're not human," James hissed. "Not entirely," Evelyn corrected, tightening her grip on the manuscript. That was when she felt it. The book in her arms began to glow, a soft golden hue radiating from its pages. At first, it was subtle, like the light catching old parchment, but then the letters themselves started shifting, rearranging, as though they were alive. A warning? A message? A lock being undone? The air thickened, becoming dense as though the walls were closing in. The tunnel ahead twisted, turning into an endless, spiraling corridor that hadn't been there before. Illusion? Reality? The lines blurred. Then, the wind came. It wasn't natural. It was cold, howling. And it struck them like a physical force, hurling them off their feet. Evelyn's back hit the ground hard, the manuscript torn from her grasp, skidding across the ancient floor. James let out a gasp of pain, rolling to his side as dust and debris swirled violently around them. Then, a shadow loomed over them. When Evelyn looked up, her heart stopped. The masked leader of the Illuminati stood before them, his robes untouched by the wind, his feet hovering inches above the ground. His ornate mask glinted in the dim firelight, its intricate engravings seeming to shift and morph as she stared. The air around him shimmered, as if reality itself was bending in his presence. "You cannot outrun destiny." His voice was not just one voice, it was layered, multiple whispers overlapping in eerie harmony. It was like hearing the past and the present speak at once. James struggled to his feet, stepping in front of Evelyn instinctively. His hands balled into fists. "What do you want?" The masked figure tilted his head slightly, considering them. Then, he raised one gloved hand, and with a flick of his wrist, the manuscript flew off the floor, straight into his grasp. Evelyn lunged for it, but the moment her fingers brushed the book, pain shot through her body. She gasped, dropping to her knees as her vision exploded with images. Leonardo da Vinci, scribbling furiously in candlelight, his eyes wild with fear. A symbol, something ancient, older than the Illuminati itself. A doorway made of light, hidden beneath a city long forgotten. And something waiting on the other side. Then, darkness. James caught Evelyn just as she collapsed, shaking from the overwhelming surge of knowledge. "What the hell did you do to her?" James roared. The masked leader didn't respond. Instead, he turned the book slowly, studying the glowing letters as if reading a message only he could understand. "It has already begun," he murmured. "The key is awake." Then, gunfire. The chamber erupted in chaos as bullets tore through the air, sending stone fragments flying. A deafening explosion rocked the tomb, fire spilling into the room as the ceiling cracked. From the smoke, Gabriel Mercer and his team stormed in. "Take them down." Mercer's voice rang out. The masked leader whipped around, raising a hand. Instantly, the flames coiled together, forming a barrier of twisting fire between him and Mercer's squad. "They're getting away," shouted a woman, Mercer's second-in-command, "Alessa Voss." James didn't wait. He grabbed Evelyn's wrist and yanked her to her feet, dodging falling debris. "We need to move, now." Mercer's team pushed forward, exchanging gunfire with the Illuminati. More hooded figures emerged from the shadows, their daggers gleaming, engaging Mercer's operatives in brutal close combat. Amidst the chaos, the masked leader turned toward the crumbling far wall. With a single gesture, he pressed his palm against the stone, and a hidden passageway yawned open, revealing a tunnel lined with symbols glowing like molten gold. "Follow them," Mercer shouted. Evelyn, James, and Mercer's team raced forward, but the moment they got close, the masked leader stepped through the passageway and vanished. The tunnel collapsed behind him, sealing itself shut in an instant. Silence. The only sound was the crackling of the dying fire and the distant groans of the wounded. Mercer cursed, kicking a loose stone. "Damn it! They took the manuscript." Evelyn staggered forward, still reeling from whatever vision the book had burned into her mind. James steadied her, concern flickering in his eyes. "Evelyn. What did you see?" he asked. She swallowed hard, her pulse still racing. "Not just a book," she whispered. "It's a map." Mercer turned sharply. "To what?" Evelyn looked up. Her eyes filled with something between fear and revelation. To something Leonardo wanted to stay buried forever. Chapter 8, Leonardo's Warning. Evelyn clutched the manuscript tighter. Something inside it was resonating with the air itself. Then, the masked leader raised his hand. The walls of the chamber trembled as a voice, ancient, powerful, whispered through the air. "You were not meant to see this. Turn back." James gritted his teeth. "That voice, it's coming from the book." Evelyn's hands trembled. Leonardo's voice? Could it be? The symbols on the pages rearranged again, forming a phrase in Renaissance Italian. La verità è un destino amaro. The truth is a bitter fate. Before she could process the meaning, the masked leader lunged forward, but at the same time, the manuscript released a burst of energy, sending him flying backward. The Illuminati staggered, momentarily stunned. This was their chance. Evelyn and James ran, racing through the ancient catacombs, deeper and deeper into the unknown. But the further they went, the more they realized. They weren't just running from the Illuminati. They were running toward something far worse. Chapter 9, The Hidden Chamber of Da Vinci. The underground tunnels twisted like an ancient labyrinth, each turn leading them deeper into darkness. The air was damp, thick with the weight of centuries-old secrets buried beneath Florence. Evelyn clutched the glowing manuscript tightly, her pulse hammering. The symbols on its pages continued to shift and rearrange, forming cryptic messages she could barely comprehend. Beside her, James ran, his breath heavy, boots echoing against the cold stone floor. "Where the hell are we going?" he asked, casting a glance behind them. Evelyn's mind worked furiously, piecing together the fragmented puzzle. The Illuminati wouldn't hide this book unless it led to something bigger. If Leonardo encrypted this location into the Mona Lisa, then there has to be another clue somewhere. A distant roar echoed from the tunnels behind them. James tightened his grip on the torch in his free hand. "They're coming." Then, the passage suddenly opened up into a massive underground chamber. Towering stone pillars stretched high into the darkness, each one carved with Da Vinci's intricate sketches, blueprints of flying machines, human anatomy, and celestial maps that glowed faintly under the flickering light. The scale of the chamber was breathtaking, as if they had just stepped into Leonardo's mind itself. And at the center, an ornate metal door, its surface covered in symbols identical to the ones in the manuscript. The symbols pulsed faintly, responding to the book's presence, as though waiting for something. Evelyn's breath caught. "This is it." James hurried forward, inspecting the door. No handle, no lock. "How do we open it?" Evelyn flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the illuminated script. The manuscript seemed alive, reacting to their urgency. Then, from nowhere, a faint whisper. A voice echoed through the chamber, soft yet unmistakable. The voice of Leonardo da Vinci himself. "La chiave è nel sang." James translated aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "The key is in the blood." Silence. Evelyn and James exchanged uneasy glances. What did that mean? Before they could react, the torches flickered violently, their flames bending unnaturally, as though responding to an unseen force. A chill swept through the chamber, carrying with it the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Then, in the corner of Evelyn's vision, movement. A shadow stirred. James froze, his hand drifting toward the small dagger at his belt. "We're not alone," Evelyn whispered. From the dark recesses of the chamber, figures emerged, stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. Their robes were different from the Illuminati they had encountered before, darker, heavier, embroidered with symbols that Evelyn didn't recognize. Their faces were obscured, some by masks carved from polished black obsidian, others by intricately etched bronze visors that concealed everything except their piercing golden eyes. A different faction. One of them spoke, his voice low, commanding. "You should not have come here." His Italian accent was thick, but his words carried ancient weight, as if spoken by generations before him. Evelyn squared her shoulders. "Who are you?" The man stepped forward, his robe shifting like liquid shadow. He raised a hand, and instantly, the symbols on the door responded, glowing even brighter. James tensed. "The true guardians of Da Vinci's knowledge," the man said. "The manuscript of truth was never meant to be found." Another figure, a woman, stepped beside him. Her presence was different. While the others stood in complete stillness, she moved with the careful grace of someone who had spent a lifetime walking the line between the seen and unseen. Her voice was softer, yet filled with warning. Leonardo was not just a visionary. He was a protector. And now, you have awakened something even he could not contain. Evelyn's grip on the manuscript tightened. "We don't have time for riddles," James snapped. "We need to get through that door." The first man's golden eyes darkened. "You misunderstand. This door does not lead to safety." Evelyn's breath hitched. "Then what does it lead to?" The woman exhaled slowly, her fingers grazing the ancient inscriptions along the metal. a place even the Illuminati fear. James swore under his breath. Fantastic. The whispers in the chamber grew louder, rising into something inhuman. The flames of the torches snapped upward, nearly going out completely. The shadows shifted, moving as though they had minds of their own. And then, a familiar voice rang out from the tunnels behind them. They're here. The Illuminati had found them. A dozen hooded figures poured into the chamber, their weapons drawn, their eyes burning with fury. The gold-eyed man didn't move, he simply turned toward Evelyn and James, and for the first time, his expression softened. You have no choice now. Then, before either of them could respond, he took James's wrist and drew a knife across his palm. Blood spilled onto the metal door. The symbols flared to life, pulsing, twisting, then, with a deep groan, the door began to open. James barely had time to register what had happened before Evelyn dragged him through the widening gap. The gold-eyed man and his companion following close behind. The Illuminati lunged, but too late. With a resounding boom, the door slammed shut behind them. Evelyn stumbled forward, gasping. The air on the other side was different. Colder. More ancient. James clutched his bleeding palm, wincing. You couldn't have warned me first. The gold-eyed man ignored him. Instead, he knelt, running his hand along the smooth black floor of the chamber they had just entered. A deep frown creased his features. This is wrong. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? The woman beside him turned, and for the first time, Evelyn saw true fear in her expression. This is not where Leonardo wanted us to go. James stiffened. Then where the hell are we? The whispers started again, but this time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from below. Chapter 10, A Sacrifice for Knowledge. Evelyn's grip on the book tightened. The key is in the blood. What does that mean? James examined the metallic engravings on the door. Da Vinci was a scientist. Maybe it's not a metaphor. Maybe, it requires actual blood. A low growl echoed from behind them. James turned, the Illuminati had caught up. Several hooded figures emerged from the tunnel, their masked leader stepping forward slowly, the eerie torchlight flickering against his silver mask. You cannot escape destiny, he said. His voice was calm, unervingly composed. Evelyn backed up against the door, her mind racing. What do you want? The leader stepped closer. Leonardo's knowledge is not meant for the uninitiated. You have already seen too much. Evelyn swallowed. If it's not meant to be seen, then why was it hidden in the Mona Lisa? The leader tilted his head slightly. Because some truths should remain buried. James lunged forward, grabbing a fallen torch and swinging it at the nearest Illuminati member. The flames barely missed the figure's cloak, forcing them to retreat momentarily. Evelyn made a split-second decision. She pulled out a small blade from her pocket, sliced her palm, and pressed it against the door. Blood smeared across the ancient symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the metal door shuddered. A loud mechanical click echoed through the chamber as the engravings on the door began to glow. A second later, the entire structure shifted, grinding stone against stone, and slowly creaked open. Beyond it, a blinding golden light poured out. Chapter 11, The Forbidden Invention. Evelyn and James rushed inside before the Illuminati could react. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the massive door slammed shut behind them, sealing them away from their pursuers. They turned to face what lay beyond. Inside the chamber, standing on an ornate stone platform, was an impossible machine, a design unlike anything seen before. Its structure was a blend of gears, cogs, and intricate metallic wiring, glowing faintly with an unnatural energy. The very air around it hummed with power. Evelyn whispered, "What is this?" James carefully approached, eyes scanning the engravings along the base of the machine. He ran his fingers over the inscription. La Machina di Dio. The Machine of God. Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. Leonardo built this? James swallowed hard. If he did, then he may have created something beyond human understanding. Before they could process, the machine suddenly roared to life. The gears began turning. Energy crackled through the air. The symbols engraved into the chamber walls illuminated, casting strange shifting shadows across the floor. Then, the manuscript in Evelyn's hands started to burn. Chapter 12, Unlocking the Code. Evelyn barely had time to react. The manuscript disintegrated in her hands, its pages burning away into golden embers that spiraled toward the machine. James stepped back. It's reacting to the book. The walls around them trembled. The energy within the machine intensified, forming a swirling vortex of golden light at its core. Evelyn's heart pounded. We have to shut it down. James shook his head. No. We need to understand it first. But before either of them could act, the vortex expanded, and suddenly, the air in the chamber was filled with visions. Images flashed before them, Leonardo da Vinci working feverishly on blueprints, an ancient order kneeling before the machine. A city burning in the distance, a gateway to somewhere else. Then, a final vision. A future where the machine is activated, and the world as they know it ceases to exist. Evelyn gasped. Chapter 13, The Final Warning. The golden vortex within the machine of God pulsed like a living entity, distorting the very air around it. Evelyn and James stood frozen. Their eyes locked on the swirling abyss of visions, images of past, present, and future intertwining in an impossible sequence. But then, the Illuminati leader stepped into the chamber. His mask gleamed in the flickering light, his long cloak swaying as he approached the machine with deliberate steps. Evelyn's pulse pounded. How did you get in here? The leader tilted his head. You were never meant to unlock this place. But since you have, destiny must take its course. He raised a small metallic device and pressed a button. The chamber doors behind them slammed shut. James cursed under his breath. We're trapped. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. What do you want? If this machine is so dangerous, why would the Illuminati keep it hidden instead of destroying it? The leader's voice remained eerily calm. Because destruction is not an option. This machine is not just a tool, it is a threshold. Evelyn and James exchanged uneasy glances. A threshold to what? James demanded. The leader stepped closer, his eyes glowing faintly beneath the mask. To the origins of knowledge itself. Leonardo da Vinci was not just a genius. He was a receiver of wisdom beyond human comprehension. And now, you have activated his final gift. Behind him, the vortex surged violently. Its tendrils of energy reaching out toward them. James shook his head. You're saying Leonardo built a machine that taps into some kind of forbidden knowledge? The leader nodded. The knowledge of the universe. The knowledge of creation. But knowledge comes at a price. Evelyn's throat went dry. And what's the price? The leader turned his gaze toward the machine. Reality itself. Forming an intricate pattern of constellations and mathematical sequences. Then, the vortex expanded, engulfing the entire room in golden light. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to freeze. And then, they saw it. Beyond the swirling abyss, a landscape of impossible geometry unfolded, a world filled with floating structures, towering spires made of liquid metal. And an unrecognizable celestial sky. Figures moved within it. Shadowy beings, their forms flickering like half-remembered thoughts, drifting through the shifting landscape. Evelyn's stomach turned. "James, what are we looking at?" James whispered, "This isn't a machine. It's a doorway." The Illuminati leader stepped forward. "Now you understand." This was Leonardo's true masterpiece. A device to peer beyond the limits of human perception. Evelyn's hands trembled. What happens if someone steps through? The leader regarded her for a long moment. They become something more. Then, a voice echoed from the vortex. A voice speaking in ancient Italian. Evelyn's breath hitched. She recognized the voice. Leonardo da Vinci. The Illuminati leader turned his gaze toward the portal, as if listening. Then, in a solemn tone, he translated. "What has been seen cannot be undone. And what has been opened, will never be closed." Chapter 15, The Price of Knowledge. The chamber trembled. The symbols on the walls began shifting, as if they were alive, rearranging into new patterns that none of them could comprehend. James grabbed Evelyn's arm. "We have to shut this down." The Illuminati leader slowly turned to them. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Evelyn ignored him. Rushing toward the machine's control panel, her fingers desperately searching for some kind of deactivation mechanism. But as soon as she touched it, a surge of energy shot through her body. She gasped, her vision blurring, and then suddenly, she was no longer in the chamber. She was somewhere else. She stood on a vast, endless plain of golden mist, stretching beyond sight. Figures loomed in the distance, indistinct, ancient beings, watching her with unreadable expressions. A familiar voice whispered in her mind. "You were not meant to come here." She turned. And there, standing before her, was Leonardo da Vinci himself. His eyes glowed with the same golden energy as the machine. His face was both familiar and foreign. As if he had long since transcended his human form. Evelyn tried to speak, but no words came out. Leonardo raised a hand, and the space around her warped, visions flooded her mind. She saw civilizations rising and falling. She saw worlds beyond her own. She saw the secrets of existence itself. And then, Leonardo whispered a single word. "Celta." Choice. Evelyn's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Leonardo gazed at her solemnly. "To know is to lose. To see is to surrender. Choose." A sudden, crushing force pulled at her mind. The visions overwhelmed her, too much knowledge, too much understanding. And then, James's voice pierced through the haze. "Evelyn. Come back." The golden mist shattered. She collapsed to the ground in the chamber, gasping for air. James was beside her, shaking her. "What happened?" Evelyn's voice trembled. "We have to destroy it. Now." Chapter 16, The End of the Machine. Evelyn forced herself to her feet. "James, help me. We have to overload the machine." James glanced at the Illuminati leader. "He won't let us." But to their shock, the leader stood motionless, staring into the vortex. His hands trembled. His mask cracked down the middle. For the first time, his voice wavered. "We were wrong." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She ran to the machine, pulling at the exposed gears, slamming buttons, forcing it into overload. The chamber began to collapse. The vortex shrank violently, spiraling inward like a dying star. The golden light dimmed. James grabbed Evelyn's hand, pulling her away as the machine tore itself apart. A final, deafening explosion of energy consumed the chamber. And then, silence. Epilogue. The truth remains hidden. When Evelyn and James awoke, they were outside the ruins, buried beneath debris. The machine of God was gone. The Illuminati had vanished. James looked at Evelyn. Did we stop it? Evelyn exhaled shakily. For now. But deep inside, she knew, some doors, once opened, never truly close. Shortly after destroying the plane, Evelyn and James are hunted down by another secret organization, a secret society even more powerful than the Illuminati. They discover that the chair is not the only one. And a more complete version still exists somewhere in the world. To be continued.